Hello there, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to the second day of our Green Ambition series, which is taking place this week. And where for our last session this afternoon, we're going to be looking at deposit return schemes. Prynhawn da chi a chroeso cynnes iawn i'r ail ddiwrnod o'n nghyfres ni Gweledigaeth Werdd sy'n cael ei chynnal wrth nos hon, a lle prynhawn ma yn ein sesiwn ola ni heddi, i ni mi edrych ar y cynllun dychwelyd blaendaw. Before we start, I'm going to hand over to TV presenter, naturalist and author Iolo Williams to officially welcome you to this afternoon's session. Iolo will be speaking in Welsh with English subtitles, but then the rest of this afternoon's session and for the rest of the week, the sessions will be held in English. Wrth gwrs, mae croeso chi gysylltu gyda ni'n Gymraeg os hoffech chi drwy ddefnyddio'r cyfleuster cwestiwn ag ateb. If you'd rather communicate with us in Welsh, you're more than welcome.
Helo yna, a croeso i gyfres y Weledigaeth Werdd Busnes Cymru. Iolo Williams ydw i, a dwi'n falch o gyflwyno'r gyfres ddiddorol hon o ddigwyddiadau a greuwyd i gynorthwyo busnesau i ddod yn fwy effeithlon o ran adnoddau. Os ydych chi, fel finnau, a diddordeb brwd mewn cynaladwyedd ac effaith amgylcheddol, yna bydd y gyfres hon yn darparu arweiniad a chymorth i'ch helpu i wneud newidiadau yn eich busnes. Mae tîm arbenigol Busnes Cymru wrth law i gynnig sesiynau cyngor un i un unigryw. Felly, os ydych chi wedi eich ysbrydoli gan yr hyn a glywch chi heddiw, yna cysylltwch â'r tîm i archebu eich sesiwn rhad ac am ddim, lle bydd cynghorwyr yn eich helpu i fapio'ch gweledigaeth werdd a symud ymlaen tuag at ddod yn fusnes fwy effeithlon o ran adnoddau. Pob lwc a diolch yn fawr i chi.
Diolch yn fawr, Iolo. Thank you very much. And thank you also to Business Wales for organising this event. Business Wales is a free service that provides impartial, independent support and advice for people starting, running and growing a business in Wales. It's funded by the Welsh Government and the European Regional Development Fund and has an excellent track record of providing innovative events like this series and training sessions. So to end today, we're going to rejoin George Atkinson from Valpac, who's been with us all day, for an introduction to deposit return schemes and an update on how one will be implemented and run across the UK. The session is aimed at retailers who may be required to offer take-back of drinks packaging and businesses interested in the implication on plastics, glass and aluminium drinks packaging recycling. So those of you with us this afternoon will gain a time frame for implementation milestones, an update on the most recent discussions had at a high level concerning DRS, and an explanation of how we see DRS working in the UK and the impact on the UK. There will be an opportunity for a live question answer session at the end, but for now I'm going to hand over once again to George.
Hello again. Thank you everyone for joining. Right, my name's George Atkinson again, for those of you who weren't on the extended producer responsibilities session a little bit earlier. This session is going to cover the third producer responsibility reform initiative, certainly the final one to consider when looking at these packaging reforms for the UK. Deposit return schemes are a significant sister initiative to Packaging Extended Producer Responsibility and will apply in addition to the plastic packaging tax for single-use beverage containers, and they're due to be implemented at different times throughout the UK across the coming years in hopefully the pursuit of achieving greater recycling rates for single-use containers placed on the UK market. Now, to provide a quick agenda for what we're going to be covering in this session, well, we're going to look at the basics of deposit return schemes, of course, as there may be some of you who might not be aware of this initiative at this point in time, as it is still, again, a few years away from implementation, why it's implemented, as well as the core aspects of it and the efforts to implement it across the nations of the UK. As mentioned, it is a producer responsibility initiative, and therefore we're then going to turn towards producer responsibilities as well as retailer responsibilities, as there may be some of you on today's session that may be affected by this in your capacity as a retailer of single-use drinks products. Turn towards financing deposit return schemes, as well as how finances and materials will flow throughout the system, before again turning to the last section of the session where I will revert to my future self, and we will hopefully have a live Q&A session where any concerns, questions you do have can be answered, and we can attempt to provide you as much guidance as possible in this area. So let's get stuck straight in respect of what is a deposit return scheme. Well, deposit return schemes have been implemented throughout the European continent at this point in time with a great deal of success, certainly if we're talking about deposit return schemes for single-use beverage containers. Now, these systems see a small deposit, of course, added to the price of each unit of something sold, and in the UK as well as throughout the EU, the DRS is used to financially incentivize consumers to present these very highly recyclable, very valuable single-use drinks containers for recycling. And of course, consumers get their deposit back upon returning eligible containers for recycling at those dedicated return points, with the containers then sold to recyclers for recycling. So this deposit return scheme really, through incentivizing the consumer in hopes to enhance the circular economy for single-use drinks packaging. Now, why is a DRS being implemented in the UK? Well, it's a very good question, and why don't we have a DRS at the moment when so many nations throughout the European Union already have them and have had them for a number of years now? Well, in the UK, if we first look at the amount of material flowing throughout the market, it's estimated that UK consumers use about 14 billion plastic drinks bottles, 9 billion drinks cans, and 1.5 billion glass bottles each year, and so a significant amount of material. However, there are some gaps in its waste management that have become apparent in recent years. For example, current recycling rates for these single-use drinks containers have hovered at around 70%, 75%, with no great improvements in recent years. And therefore, the government is considering, and devolved administrations I should add, whether alternative approaches will be needed to increase and enhance the recycling rate of these drinks containers. And it's also noted, as the second point on this slide says, that by volume drinks containers make up around 75% of the litter found on the UK streets. And there's also a large concern with plastic packaging contamination and litter along marine coastlines as well. Now, 5.5 billion plastic bottles each year are landfilled, littered or incinerated, so a significant amount of material that it is hoped through financially incentivizing the consumer can be dealt with in a more environmentally sound manner. And then lastly, whilst no longer a member of the European Union, it is important to consider the drivers of deposit return schemes at international levels. Certainly, the UK, when it was a member of the European Union, signed up and was a signatory to the EU Single-Use Plastics Directive. And as far as we understand, the UK government wishes to honour the commitments it signed up to within that directive, even as it has now left the EU. And within that directive, member states were or are required to collect 77% of single-use plastic bottles placed on the market by weight by 2025, rising to 90% by 2029. And primarily speaking, it's envisaged that deposit return schemes are the means by which to achieve those recycling ends. So that's why deposit return schemes are being implemented in the UK. Now let's look at the question of how they're being implemented. As mentioned, deposit return schemes are being implemented at different times across different places in the UK, and hopefully this colour-coded map simply outlines how that is happening. Both the Scottish DRS and rest of UK DRS that will apply to England, Wales and Northern Ireland respectively will target a 90% container return rate, so seek a 15 to 20% increase upon current single-use drinks container recycling rates. The Scottish DRS is far more advanced in its implementation than the rest of UK DRS. Only recently, the Scottish DRS was delayed until the 16th of August 2023. Apologies for the typo on the slide there. and that will target the 90% container return rate in 2025. We also know that there is a separate industry-led body called Circularity Scotland that has been established to administer the Scottish DRS, and as part of that, consumers will see a 20p deposit added to the cost of each single-use drinks container within the materials and within a certain size that's sold to them from the 16th of August 2023. Now, it's worth mentioning that Scottish DRS was initially proposed to be implemented across 2021, and then as a result of EU exit, as well as a December election back in 2019, all of these factors that put delays on the implementation process. The delay to the Scottish DRS was put back even further to July 2022, and then just before Christmas, it was announced that August 2023, the start of the new school year, as far as I understand, will be the date the Scottish DRS will go ahead. But then in respect to the rest of UK DRS, as mentioned, we know far less about the core aspects of that in comparison to the Scottish scheme. We don't know the full implementation date at this point in time. Certainly, the last information we received on the rest of UK DRS was published by the government and devolved administrations of Northern Ireland and Wales in spring of 2021, when there was a period of public consultation on updated proposals for reform. Now, within that, late 2024 was mentioned as a potential implementation date for the rest of UK DRS. We don't therefore have the full implementation date, nor do we have clarity on which business or new body might be established to administer the rest of UK DRS. That is still to be confirmed. Hopefully a bit more clarity will be received on that later this year. We also do not know the deposit level of the rest of UK DRS. Of course, in an ideal world, there may be some consistency between the Scottish DRS and rest of UK DRS, but that is not a given at this point in time. And actually, to that end, the deposit level for the rest of UK DRS will be set by the administrative body as opposed to in legislation by the government and devolved administrations. So as mentioned, more information to come out across 2022 in respect of the UK DRS. Now, what products does this initiative cover? Well, of course, it will see a deposit added to each single-use drinks can or bottle intended to be sold in an airtight state, and helpfully both the rest of UK DRS and Scottish DRS will cover or plan to cover the same materials. So that, again, that is PET plastic bottles, steel and aluminium drinks cans, as well as glass bottles. Crucially, as it says in blue on the slide, secondary and tertiary packaging is not in scope within this deposit return scheme. So you cannot return any multi-pack packaging to a dedicated deposit return scheme return point and get a deposit back on that, nor will any tertiary packaging or transport packaging, for example stretch wrap, be returnable under deposit return scheme. Only the primary packaging, so the packaging that makes up an individual sales unit, likely is in direct contact with the drink itself, as well as the label, of course, of the drink, will be a part of the returnable item. And then, as it says at the bottom of this slide, the scope of the deposit return schemes in the UK are material dependent rather than product dependent. That means that alcohol will be within scope of this deposit return scheme, as well as milk if it is in one of those target container materials. Crucially, milk is probably going to be exempt because more often than not it is within HDPE or cartons. However, it could be in scope of this DRS if it's within that container material. So some consistency there in respect of materials within the scope of the DRS. However, there may be some inconsistency in respect of size scope of the UK's deposit return schemes. To that end, the Scottish DRS has confirmed the implementation of what's known as an all-in size design. That means that all containers within those in-scope materials, those 4 materials, between 50 millilitres and 3 litres in capacity inclusive, will be in scope of the Scottish DRS, and it's estimated that that will see about 2.2 billion units placed on the Scottish market in the year being scope of that deposit return scheme. Multi-pack units are going to be in scope of the Scottish DRS, not the multi-pack packaging itself, and they will be treated the same as single units. At the moment, that stands in contrast with the rest of UK DRS, and that's because the rest of UK DRS's size scope remains to be confirmed by the government. What we know at this point in time is that the UK government, as well as the devolved administrations of Northern Ireland and Wales, are still considering whether to implement an all-in system in a similar manner to that the Scottish government is taking, or instead go for a reduced scope system, which is commonly known as on-the-go. Now, this on-the-go system will only see containers that are less than 750 millilitres in scope, and only those that are sold individually, so no multi-pack containers will be in scope of the deposit return scheme. Now, that will obviously mean that far less containers will be in scope of the rest of UK DRS if it is on the go in comparison to if it would be all in. As mentioned on the slide, an on-the-go system throughout the markets of England, Wales and Northern Ireland would see 7.4 billion units in scope, whereas an all-in system would see 23.7 billion units in scope per year, though, both those figures. On this, again, no information as to what the final decision will be on this. However, it was stated in the spring 2021 consultation that the Welsh government is very keen to adopt an all-in approach to a deposit return scheme, similar to the Scottish approach. However, they would also prefer a harmonised approach to the rest of UK DRS across each of the UK nations for the betterment of consumer understanding as well as producer understanding of this system. So we'll have to wait and see at this point. As mentioned, more information hopefully across the rest of this year. But now let's turn to responsibilities. As mentioned, deposit return schemes, as it says in the middle of this slide, they are a form of extended producer responsibility, a sister initiative to to the EPR initiative that I discussed previously on another session today. Deposit return schemes are therefore they replace any costs a business might see under current or future producer responsibility systems for packaging waste. That means that if you place one of these drinks articles on these products that's going to be in scope of the DRS systems on a national market throughout the UK, you will need to make payments to the relevant DRS administrator, and that may replace any payments you made previously for placing that packaging on the market under the PRN system that's currently in place, or under the extended producer responsibility system that is proposed to be implemented in the UK across 2024. But who are producers under this system? Well, in a very similar manner to extended producer responsibility proposals, UK brand owners or importers of non-UK brands will be considered the producer party under deposit return schemes, as well as online retailers where single-use drinks products are first marketed for sale to be placed on the UK market or sold to producers in a relevant nation. Excuse me. And then we'll turn to what activities obligated businesses as producers will actually need to do in order to comply with requirements placed on them as a result of these initiatives. First and foremost, there'll be an obligation to register with the relevant administrator each year, so that may be Circularity Scotland as well as the administrator of the rest of UK deposit return scheme. As part of that registration, you would need to declare both your basic business information, nominate a point of contact, as well as an estimate of sales numbers, both from the previous calendar year as well as the number of containers you anticipate placing on the market in the year to which the registration relates, as well as providing the administrator with examples of in-scope containers, so your actual packaging. And that is intended to enable reverse vending machines that most of us will begin to deal with in our daily lives. Reverse vending machines will need to understand what material is being placed within it and what material is in scope of it, and therefore needs a deposit paid out to the consumer that has returned it in order for the DRS to operate in an effective manner. So these example packagings that need to be provided to the administrators are going to be absolutely crucial going forward. Following that registration and the payment of a small registration fee, there will be an obligation to record and report sales of units, products in scope of the deposit return schemes to those administrators throughout, the sales by each UK nation. So you will need to report to the rest of UK DRS administrator sales for England, Wales and Northern Ireland respectively, by material as well, so by plastic, steel and aluminium or glass, as well as at intervals which are still to be confirmed. We don't know whether that would need to be each year, twice a year, quarterly, monthly, or information on that remains to come to the fore. And then thirdly, financing the operation of the deposit return scheme will also be, or potentially the most significant obligation placed on businesses to be defined as producers within the system. And to that end, these businesses will be required to pay a producer fee for each unit that is in scope of the UK's DRS systems that's placed on the market. And that producer fee may be a fraction of a pence or maybe a few pence for each unit, and it will be paid to the administrator and cover their costs as well as the central operating costs of the deposit return scheme. For example, the costs associated with data systems and the cost of central counting houses that act as bulking points for containers before they then get sent off to recyclers for recycling. In addition to that, for each unit placed on the market, a handling fee will also need to be paid by the producer party. And that handling fee again remains to be announced at this point in time, both for the Scottish and rest of UK DRS systems. But again, it will probably be a fraction of a pence, maybe a few pence per unit placed on the market. And that payment will cover the operating costs of return points and services for those operating them. And that's where we can then turn to retailer responsibilities as a result of talking about handling fees. Now, under this system, under deposit return schemes, retailers, defined as bricks and mortar stores, online retailers, or even the owners of reverse vending machines or the premises upon which those vending machines sit, will have a number of responsibilities under the deposit return scheme as well, both from an administrative, operational, and potentially even initially a financial aspect as well. First and foremost, if you retail containers in scope of these deposit return schemes to consumers within the applicable nations, you'll be required to provide DRS specific information to the consumer. So as the sub-bullet says, you'll have to outline to the consumer what products are in scope of the deposit return scheme, the applicable deposit rate to them, as well as information on how and where a deposit can be redeemed. So for example, you might need to have that information behind your tills to say where the nearest return point is and how the consumer can get their 20p or other rate of deposit back. So that's an initial pre-sale information provision obligation on retailers. However, there's an additional obligation on those retailers to operate a return point for any DRS containers that any consumer wishes to bring back to your location. And that's really crucial because you are not just required to take back the containers that you have sold to that consumer. Your return point will operate just like any other return point if you are an obligated retailer. Therefore, you will need to accept the take back of containers sold by other premises if your return point is able to, it has the room. Returns can be either done through, as mentioned, installing a reverse vending machine or through operating a manual over-the-counter return point staffed by an actual employee. Now, there will be costs to you over time of this. For example, the loss of floor space for selling, the cost of keeping containers in certain boxes or bags for collection by a waste collector. All of those costs are intended to be offset over time for those offering the return point through the payment of handling fees to them from the DRS administrator, with those handling fees themselves having come into the administrator from those obligated producer businesses for each unit they've placed on the market. That DRS administrator, as the sub-bullet says in the middle of this slide, will provide the return point operator a handling fee for each unit that the administrator collects. Now, there may be some exemptions to operating return points for businesses within Wales. Certainly, in respect to the Scottish DRS, categories such as floor space, as well as the cost of hosting a return point, are factors that regulators are considering when looking at whether a retail location needs to be exempted from hosting a return point. But in addition to hosting return points in store, there is an additional obligation on online retailers to offer a take-back service from the site of delivery. So this is where, if for example a supermarket was to sell in-scope units to consumers and deliver them to their doorstep, they would then need to offer a separate service that enables the consumer to hand over those containers sold back to a provider free of charge to the consumer, subject to potentially the charging of extra fees that would then additionally be refunded to the consumer. So we've got two potentially significant obligations here placed on retailers. Worth noting as well the obligations for hospitality retailers selling in-scope products for consumption on site only. If you are one of those businesses, for example, a hotel, a stadium, a pub, and you only allow the on-site consumption of in-scope products, you do not need to necessarily operate a return point or charge deposits. You are only required to operate a return point and charge deposits if you allow the off-site consumption of those drinks containers. But certainly if you only allow for the on-site consumption, you may not need to do that. Again, more information both expected from Circularity Scotland as well as the rest of UK DRS Administrator once that is established at a later point in time. But those are, in a nutshell, producer and retailer responsibilities. And now I wanted to turn to a material flow diagram just to reiterate how material and the deposit flows throughout the system. This diagram is heavily animated, so please do stick with me whilst we go through it. However, hopefully it will help your understanding of deposit return schemes and how they work. So first and foremost, we'll see the producer, that brand owner or importer most likely, pay the scheme administrator a deposit, handling fee and producer fee for each unit placed on the market in the applicable UK nation, as well as the annual registration fee as it says in the top left of this diagram. And once that is done, most likely at the start of each year, we'll then have the deposit and the container go on its journey throughout the normal supply chain. So the can or the bottle will be supplied from the producer, most likely to a wholesaler, who will, on top of paying the normal price for those units from the producer, they'll also reimburse the producer the deposits that the producer previously paid to the scheme administrator. So under that system, the producer will already have been reimbursed its deposit amount. The wholesaler will then sell that unit to a retailer, of course, again with the retailer paying will pay a deposit rate atop the price it will normally pay to the wholesaler for the purchase of those products. Then, naturally, the retailer will sell the products to consumers. Again, the consumer will pay the price plus a deposit rate, so the retailer then will be reimbursed. And then this is where deposit return schemes really show their benefits to society for certain drinks containers. The establishment of DRS return points, most likely at those obligated retailer locations, enable consumers to return these containers for recycling and then receive deposits back. And then after that, the last stage in the chain is for the scheme administrator to go and itself collect or charge a subcontracted waste collector to go and collect the materials from DRS return points. And upon validating the return of containers within scope of the deposit return schemes, the scheme administrator will reimburse the return point, most likely the retailer, a deposit and handling fee for each unit collected. So that is how the deposit return scheme is intended to enhance the recycling rate of packaging, single-use drinks packaging. Certainly throughout Europe, in the Scandinavian nations, for example, recycling rates for these containers, or collection rates for these containers, I should say, can exceed 90%, be even as high as 95%. And it's hoped that the implementation of these DRS systems throughout the UK can achieve similar results before too long. But lots to be decided in respect of DRS systems, especially this rest of UK DRS system that's going to be implemented throughout England, Wales and Northern Ireland. In terms of financing the DRS, as mentioned, the scheme administrator's costs will be met through a variety of things. First and foremost, the sale of containers to recyclers. So all of those containers the scheme administrator receives back from DRS return points will be sold to recyclers, most likely at a profit, as they are highly recyclable. Deposits unredeemed by consumers will also be retained by the scheme administrator for the betterment of the system, be it operationally or from a consumer communications perspective. And then the shortfall there, if the DRS administrators have any remaining gaps in their funding, that gap will be funded by those producer fees that each brand owner or importer will be paying for each unit they've placed on the UK market or the applicable national market. In respect of the all-in Scottish DRS, the implementation cost is estimated to be about £30 million a year, with an ongoing operational cost of about £75 million a year. Certainly that's the latest information out of the Scottish Government. And that pales in comparison to the potential costs of the rest of UK DRS, but of course, as mentioned, the size scope model of the rest of UK DRS system remains to be confirmed at this point in time. Certainly we can see that an all-in DRS with its far greater scope of container sizes would see a lot more containers within its scope and naturally cost more, potentially with an implementation cost of £2 billion, with then an ongoing operational cost of £172 million a year estimated. And that stands in comparison to an on-the-go system with about a 50% implementation cost in comparison to the all-in system, and then an £85 million per year cost, of course, coverable by those brand owners or importers. So significant costs here in pursuit of achieving a increase in single-use container recycling rates. So it remains to be seen just how successful deposit return schemes will be in enhancing the circular economy for single-use drinks packaging. However, we will see just how effective they are over the coming years. Just a few more slides from me before we turn back to the Q&A session. It's important to consider how deposit return schemes fit in with the wider extended producer responsibility reform initiative. Certainly the session earlier today covered this timeline that shows that EPR will be implemented from 2024 onwards. However, important to note that if you are a producer of single-use drinks packaging, there will be numerous periods throughout 2023 and 2024 where your rules for producer responsibility payments will change as a result of deposit return schemes. Let's go through the 4 periods that are outlined on this slide here. So first and foremost, there is the current system that's in place until August 2023 when that Scottish DRS gets implemented. Under that, regardless of what type of packaging you place in the UK market, be it the actual product itself in its primary packaging, the secondary packaging, its multi-pack, or the tertiary packaging that ensures it is transported in a secure manner throughout the UK, you will most likely be obligated to contribute towards its recycling cost as a result of being a business that operates within the packaging waste supply chain. That is the current system that was established under the 1997 packaging waste regulations, and as mentioned, it will continue to be in place across 2023 until August 2023 when the Scottish DRS gets implemented. And once that is implemented and until the start of 2024, the brand owner or the importer will need to make separate payments to Circularity Scotland for primary drinks packaging that's in scope of the Scottish DRS and placed on the Scottish DRS market. Of course, any articles that are in scope of the Scottish DRS but actually placed on the market throughout England, Wales or Northern Ireland, well, payments for that will still need to be made to the UK PRN system as stated under current rules. And then going forward from the 1st of January onwards until a point in late 2024, that's as far as we know at this point in time, the PRN system in the UK will be replaced by the EPR system. And that's where, as previously mentioned in the session earlier today, there will be a real explosion in producer responsibility costs, where the brand owner or the importer of the packaged goods will need to pay a per tonne rate to fund the full net cost of the waste management operations associated with that packaging waste placed on the UK market. And then from late 2024 onwards, we will then have the implementation, or expect the implementation, of the rest of UK DRS. And under that system, we expect again the brand owner or the importer to be responsible for the payment of a deposit rate, potentially 20p, we've theorized on this slide, as well as likely a producer fee and a handling fee for each unit placed on the market. So your primary packaging, you will need to contribute towards the respective administrators of the UK DRS systems. And then for any secondary or tertiary packaging you've placed on the market that is out of scope of the DRS, you will need to contribute towards its packaging waste management through contributions to the UK EPR administrator, I should say. Now, this is obviously very complex information, and if you do have any questions after today's session, then please do get in touch with Business Wales, and they will be more than happy to put you in touch with Valpak so we can help you understand both how you will go about establishing, for example, container return infrastructure, how you will uncover your potential financial exposure to this system. Deposit return schemes are still an unknown quantity in the UK, especially at a rest of UK level. So engagement at this early point in the reform process is going to be necessary if you hope to make a success of this refreshingly ambitious reform initiative, I must say. Just a couple more slides on timelines at this point in time. As mentioned, the Scottish Deposit Return Scheme is far more advanced in its implementation than the rest of UK DRS. And this is the timeline that Circularity Scotland produced not long ago to outline how they anticipate implementing the Scottish DRS over the coming years, as we crucially move towards the 16th of August 2023 implementation date. Crucial dates here are really that from January of 2023, producer registrations for Circularity Scotland will open for those brand owners or importers of the in-scope units. And then as we move closer to the middle of 2023, there will be full testing periods. So across then, it will be really important to engage with reverse vending machine providers, for example, as well as Circularity Scotland itself, in order to understand what changes you might need to make, for example, in respect of labelling or changing your stores to facilitate those container returns. As mentioned at the bottom, the implications of the recently announced delay to the Scottish DRS means that brand owners and importers of goods that are going to be in scope of the Scottish DRS will need to record their 2022 sales in order to report them to Circularity Scotland when registering with them in early 2023. So if you're not already doing that, I would highly encourage you to begin recording that information in advance of reporting it come January next year. And then final slide, I do believe at this point in time, the rest of UK DRS itself, as mentioned numerous times throughout today's session, more information is expected across 2022. So across this year, we're expecting the rest of UK DRS administrator appointment process to kick off, and hopefully we'll get that administrator appointed at some point in the early portion of next year. We're also expecting crucial decisions to be made, not least on the deposit level for the UK DRS, the body that's going to administer it, as well as those producer and handling fees that will help concerned businesses uncover their potential financial exposures to these systems. Hopefully more information is going to be contained within the summary of consultation response document that we expect DEFRA and the devolved administrations of Northern Ireland and Wales to produce, hopefully across Q1 or Q2 of 2022, as we move to what we still understand is a late 2024 implementation of the rest of UK DRS. Apologies. But that is all the information on deposit return schemes I wish to highlight today. Hopefully that has been a useful whistle-stop tour outlining what we know and what we don't know and what this initiative may entail for both producers and retailers of single-use drinks packaging. We'll now go back to my future self, who is hopefully going to be able to field any questions concerned parties have. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George. I love the transition from future self to George. I think it's really refreshing also to find out how successful the schemes have been in Scandinavia. I think I saw a news clip where the consumers were saying it just takes a while to get used to actually bringing the bottles and stuff back. But once you do, as you said, what was it, 90%? Extraordinary.
Yes, yeah. In excess of 90% in some countries, yeah.
So very encouraging. Okay, so if any of you have any questions, please do post them in the question and answer. So os cwestiynau gyda chi, cofiwch I rhoi nhw yn y cwestiwn ag ateb. We've had a few during the presentations. The first one, George, is how do I show my products are in scope of the DRS?
So product labeling is going to be absolutely key to help show consumers that this item does bear a deposit. It will be charged to you upon purchasing it, but also that it is crucially redeemable should you present it for recycling. Certainly in respect of the Scottish deposit return scheme, we're aware that there are plans to make or to provide producers in the scope of this deposit scheme in Scotland with the opportunity to apply a specialised logo to that would help consumers identify what's in scope. Throughout the rest of the UK, we may well see a similar initiative undertaken to have a specific logo. However, as kind of mentioned, we're still a few years away from the implementation of the deposit scheme across Wales, Northern Ireland and England. So it remains to be seen just what logo they'll go with, or whether it will be the same as the Scottish deposit return scheme logo. So early days at this point in time. However, we think some specialised labelling, maybe specialised barcodes may need to be used at some point in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question. So we use third parties to deliver products to consumers. So are we the retailers or the third party responsible for providing the DRS take-back service?
Primarily speaking, it will be on the actual retailer itself and not the third party. Certainly, there'll be a growing amount of containers sold to consumers through online delivery, as that's very commonplace nowadays. And as a result of that, lots of third parties will be involved or may be asked to become involved in the take back of these. Now, those third parties will not be obligated, of course. However, it might be, for example, financially lucrative for them to engage with retailers to offer that take back service. And something else that was mentioned during that is there'll be lots of retailers for whom offering a take-back service from the consumer doorstep will be a fairly expensive undertaking for them to do. And to that end, there's a sort of industry initiative being run by the largest retailers, or certainly those providing online deliveries of in-scope units, to investigate the feasibility of a central take-back service so that individual retailers can discharge their requirement to offer that take-back service to this central provider. So hopefully that will provide even the smallest retailers doing online deliveries a way to comply with these new laws.
Lovely, thank you. So I've got two questions here kind of can combine. What is a digital DRS? Will it be used in the UK? And Kelly's asking, are we considering digital DRS in Wales?
So digital DRS is absolutely being considered in Wales, it's worth saying. Digital deposit return schemes enable consumers to redeem their deposits. In case of Scotland, 20p, rest of UK we don't know just yet, but able to dispose of the container, place it in their recycling bin, and provided they both scan a code on the bottle or can itself, as well as the bin, with which they'll be provided a sticker to put on the bin. Then they can redeem their deposits back via an app. So it's a web-based DRS, offers technological solutions to this, and actually does not disrupt recycling streams that currently a local council would collect. In Wales itself, Wales has been a bit of a hotbed for digital DRS trials. Certainly there was a trial in Conway not long ago, just looking at the notes here from the providers of that digital DRS, a really high degree of engagement, so 97% engagement. The vast majority of households, of which there was a few hundred households involved in this trial, returned at least half of the large water bottles that they were provided, or I should say return them via the digital deposit solution. So trials like this, of course, will need to be undertaken at wider scale as we move throughout the future, and certainly I don't think digital DRS and this app-based recycling system is going to replace return to retail, which is going to be central to deposit return schemes in the UK initially, at least. But I do think this digital DRS system has the potential to slot alongside that return to retail model in future, so that consumers have multiple ways to get their deposits back and actually recycle successfully.
I think it sounds amazing because it makes it easier for the consumer, really, doesn't it? If you're already recycling at home. Do the other countries that are so successful, are they using digital DRS systems?
Not at scale at this point in time. It's still quite a novel technology. It's up there with sort of other novel technologies. For example, chemical recycling is something that's fairly new and not pervasive across Europe. But I think all of the systems throughout Europe that have a deposit return scheme that's achieving good rates, they're all investigating this at the same time, because, as I said, whilst they are achieving sort of 90, maybe even up to 95% container returns rates, this digital DRS provides another extra level of convenience. Of course, doesn't work for everyone because not everyone has access to the internet or a smartphone, so there'll still need to be reverse vending machines and return to retail models, but certainly valuable across Europe too.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well, we haven't had, that's it for the questions, but thank you so much, George. Diolch yn fawr iawn, George, am fod gyda ni drwy'r dydd. For those of you who joined us today, I do hope that this session has been both helpful and informative. And as George did say, you can book one-to-one sessions with a Valpac expert for bespoke advice for your business. So if you would like to do that, you just have to contact businesswales.gov.wales/green ambition. We're back tomorrow with another 2 sessions. We're looking at the circular economy and industrial symbiosis at 10 o'clock, and then focusing on making the transition to ultra-low emission vehicles at 2 p.m. Cofiwch, os chi wedi colli sesiwn, neu methu dod I sesiwn, mae modd I chi ddal I fyny ar y sesiynau. Os ewch chi event box a clico ar y prif stafell, y main room, gallwch chi dewis pa sesiwn I chi eisiau gweld. You can, if you've missed a session or can't join us, you can catch up with this on demand via event box. Just go into the main room and then click on the session you wish to watch. I hope you've enjoyed today. Thank you so much for joining us. Diolch yn fawr iawn am fod gyda ni heddi. Hope to see you tomorrow. But for now, enjoy the sunshine. Diolch yn fawr.